It started on a cold Monday morning. I stood at the window of my small apartment, a mug in my hands that had gone cold, watching the city lights fade as the sky grew pale. At that moment, I believed everything was steady. I had a job that mattered, a circle of friends who showed up when it counted, and Lena, who made the hours between work and sleep feel worth it. I said the words "I have everything" without questioning them. I was wrong. My name is Ryan. I had poured myself into the marketing role at a growing startup. I lived in campaigns, deadlines, and the quiet thrill of a client compliment. Ethan, my manager, praised my instincts. He sent messages at odd hours complimenting headlines and mock-ups. His praise made me push harder. He set a standard I aimed to reach. Lena shared the grind. She worked on projects and sat with me through late edits. She laughed in a way that softened the steady pressure of our days. We planned small futures over takeout and spreadsheets. Trust came easily. I wanted to trust them, and I did. Small things began to shift. Ethan's replies took longer. His tone held a distance I could not explain. My proposals arrived with edits that erased my voice without a conversation. Lena started missing dinners, claiming extra hours at the office. Her texts were brief and polite, empty of the details she used to pour into our conversations. I told myself these were normal stresses, nothing to worry about. I told myself I was tired and reading too much into tiredness. Doubt sat in the back of my mind, a stubborn presence I refused to acknowledge. Then Ethan called a meeting on a Friday morning. The message said to be there in 10 minutes. No agenda, no context. My heart picked up a rhythm I could feel in my throat. We gathered in the conference room and waited. Ethan stood and spoke with a calm that carried finality. He said there were serious irregularities in my last project. He said the client's funds had been mishandled. He said the logs and signatures matched my account. He presented folders, printouts, timestamps, and access records. He spoke of proof. The words hit hard. I moved to explain, to protest, to show him accounts and emails that would clear my name. The room closed around an accusation that felt heavier than words. Lena sat there and did not meet my eyes. I tried to make them see the mistake. I said I never approved fraudulent invoices. I said I had no reason to betray the work or the team that trusted me. I offered evidence of my processes. He showed more folders. Each sheet had a mark that tied back to me. The evidence was arranged with care, the claims precise, the outcome decided in tone. I felt the ground shift under my feet. The company terminated my position by evening, access revoked, projects reassigned, and an email that explained the decision in corporate language that removed any trace of sympathy. I left with a box of belongings and a shock that hollowed out the space where pride had lived. Outside, rain fell. I stood under the awning and watched the building through wet glass. Inside, Ethan and Lena moved together. Ethan's arm rested around her. They smiled, as if nothing drastic had happened. Their calm was ordinary, domestic. The sight stung. My hands trembled and the cold seeped through my jacket. The arrangement of the evidence, the timing of the meeting, and the way they looked at each other formed a pattern that did not belong to chance. The realization struck with clarity. This had been planned. Anger arrived first, sharp and hot. It mingled with a heavy shame that gnawed at my confidence. I felt exposed and foolish for having trusted so easily. The betrayal was a precise unmaking of everything I had built. It was personal and public. A reputation eroded in hours. Clients I had cultivated were now warned away. Friends who had been part of the same rhythm of late nights and shared victories offered condolences that felt distant and tentative. Calls stopped. Messages went unanswered. The world contracted into a heavy quiet that pressed against my chest. I retreated to a cheap rented room and let the days become a blur. Sleep was shallow. Food stayed in packages. I replayed the meeting, Ethan's words, the printouts, Lena's silence. I scoured through old emails and archived files, driven by a need to understand how the paperwork had been forged and why someone would choose me. The work had been my life, and I could not accept that it had been taken on the word of manipulated evidence. The more I dug, the more fragments I found that did not align. Small inconsistencies in timestamps, IP addresses that pointed elsewhere, signatures that bore subtle differences. Each fragment was a question I could not ignore. Anger settled into focus. The desire for answers turned into a plan. I would not let this become only a memory of loss. I began tracing transactions, compiling logs, and reconstructing chains of approvals. Names surfaced, emails linked where they should not have, and patterns emerged that showed intentional misdirection. Each discovery removed a piece of the fog from my head and replaced it with a clear shape. This was deliberate. They had used my access and my proximity to build a case that would make me the fall guy. They had weaponized trust. I thought of Lena's hands on our table, of her laughter during midnight editing sessions. I thought of the small kindnesses that had made me lower my guard. I thought of Ethan's compliments and how they had not been simply praise, but a way to gain confidence and authority. The tenderness and the professional encouragement had been used to hide calculation. The two people who occupied my closest spaces had built a structure that could collapse my life. The realization hardened something inside me. If they could destroy what I had, then I had to dismantle the comfort they had found on the ruins of my reputation. The first acts of my plan were quiet. I reached out to an old client who had left under suspicious circumstances. I showed the anomalies I had found. He listened with a caution that turned into anger when he saw the documents. Word moved slowly at first. I created an anonymous blog that told fragments disguised as fiction, enough to make people whisper. I fed precise pieces of evidence to colleagues and partners, timing releases to generate curiosity and doubt. I arranged meetings and left traces that would invite scrutiny. Slowly, the narrative shifted. People who had accepted Ethan's account now saw discrepancies. The tide turned from my isolation toward a cautious interest in the truth. Even as I gathered proof and watched the world respond, I felt an ache that revenge would not fill. The plan provided a purpose and a pathway to clearing my name. But the hollow that betrayal left was not a thing reclaimed by exposure. It was a wound that changed how I viewed trust. The work of rebuilding would be longer than the work of exposing. I reminded myself of this often, because purpose without reflection would make me replicate what I despised. I wanted justice, not to become the person who delighted in the downfall of others. Betrayal had removed everything, and in its removal it had also opened a space. Into that space, I poured attention and strategy. I trained myself to read trails of data and to listen to the way people acted when they believed themselves safe. I learned patience and precision. I learned that truth can be slow and relentless, and that unraveling a lie requires the careful placement of facts where they cannot be ignored. I moved forward with a clarity born from loss, and with each small victory, I felt the heavy fog of humiliation lift. The first step was exposure, but the steps after were about rebuilding a life that could not be taken so easily again. The next few weeks felt like being suspended underwater. Every breath a struggle, every move slow and muffled, like the world existed through a thick glass. Friends who had once filled my phone with late-night memes and "you up?" messages went quiet. Some sent a single awkward line of sympathy and then disappeared. Family calls came with that tiny, aching pause, the one that meant they didn't know if they should believe me or protect themselves from the fallout. Their voices were smaller, cautious. It sounded like the world was testing how much of me it could take before deciding I was untrustworthy. Money that had seemed steady evaporated faster than I expected. Retainers were cancelled after clients were told I'd been removed for misconduct. Projects I had built were reassigned in the space of a morning. The small safety net I'd kept for emergencies thinned, then frayed. I learned in bureaucratic letters how polite corporate language can be its own kind of violence. "We regret to inform you," followed by a finality that left no room for argument. I began skipping meals because food was another line item I could cut. Doing laundry felt like wasting time I could use to dig up answers. Basic routines that once grounded me drifted away. I let my hoodie become permanent wear because changing clothes felt like pretending life was normal. I moved into a cheap basement room far from downtown, a place with damp corners and a single lamp that buzzed like an insect. The landlord smiled like someone who'd seen this before and knew not to ask questions. The room smelled faintly of mold and old newspapers. It had a bed, a rickety table, and a chair that leaned ominously to one side. The window was small and sat at the top of the wall, so outside life was only visible in a sliver of sky. I learned to live in that sliver. I set my laptop on the table, opened folders I shouldn't have accessed after leaving, and turned the lamp into my confessional. I let the glow of the screen replace daylight. Nights bled into mornings until I couldn't tell the time, and the city outside kept moving. A carousel of lives that didn't stop for someone whose name had been dragged through mud. The meeting replayed in my head like a broken recording. Ethan's voice had been calm and precise. Calm carries conviction. He laid out the folders like a case file and spoke of logs, timestamps, and signatures as if they were physical proofs of a crime. He had that look of professional detachment, the kind that implies the conclusion was reached before the facts were even examined. Lena's silence was worse than any accusation. She sat there with her hands folded, eyes fixed on the table, as if the voice dominating the room had drained color from her face. I tried to speak, to tell them there had to be a mistake, to explain I had never approved the invoices that were supposed to bear my name. But the air in the room had become dense. People listened politely and then looked away. It felt like watching them step off a train without asking whether you wanted to come along. At first, the anger I felt turned inward. I rewound every conversation, every compliment from Ethan, every late-night laugh with Lena, trying to find where I'd misread a signal or overlooked a warning. I hated myself for being naive, for taking praise at face value, for letting warmth be a substitute for careful judgment. Self-blame is easier to carry than rage at another person because it feels like penance you can control. I punished myself with hypothetical scenarios of what I should have noticed and when I should have acted. It was exhausting and almost paralyzing. The more I punished myself, the less energy I had to actually do anything that might salvage the situation. Then came a small, ordinary moment that changed everything. A photo on social media. Ethan and Lena, smiling on a beach, the kind of picture captioned with a vague optimism. New beginnings and a sunrise emoji. They looked relaxed in a way that made my chest tighten. While I counted taps on job applications and watched my savings dwindle, they were taking pictures in the sun. The image hit me like cold water. It stripped away the last shreds of denial. The calm I'd mistaken for a misread signal hardened into a stone of realization. If they could plan this, if they could dismantle my life with paper and patience, then maybe I could find a way to dismantle the calm they'd built on top of my ruin. I began to collect pieces. At first, it felt like rummaging through the remnants of a house fire. A few scorched photographs, a bent spoon, something recognizable amid the rubble. I logged into old accounts I hadn't touched, scraped caches, and pulled archived emails from backups I'd saved on my personal drives. The company had closed my main account, but copies and backups live longer than the platforms meant to hold them. I found draft versions of contracts in shared folders, files labeled in half-remembered conventions, and emails with headers that didn't quite match the official timeline Ethan had presented. Tiny anomalies at first. A timestamp that didn't line up, an IP address registered from a different location, a font that switched mid-document. Any one of them could be a clerical error. Together they began to look like a deliberate arrangement. As I dug deeper, what had seemed like scattered oddities solidified into something that could be followed. I traced invoice numbers to banking records and found transfers routed through accounts that didn't belong to any legitimate vendor. The transfers were smartly split into small amounts and routed through shell accounts, a tactic designed to avoid immediate detection. It was meticulous, and the more meticulous it was, the angrier I felt. I mapped it out on paper, pinned printouts to my wall, connected lines between names and accounts like a detective in a movie I never wanted to star in. Late into the night, I cross-referenced correspondence, checked digital fingerprints, and noted every inconsistency. Each confirmed fact was a prickle of relief. Proof that the story, told in that conference room, had been a construct, built on someone else's convenience. The hardest discovery was Lena's name appearing on some of the documents as a witness. Seeing it printed there, her handwriting, a typed signature, an email that bore her approval, felt like a stab in the chest. I tried to imagine the possibilities. Was she coerced, complicit, or simply careless? None of those possibilities softened the blow. The presence of her name made the accusation personal in a way that data alone could not. It turned abstract betrayal into a betrayal that had the curve of her letters, the familiarity of her phrasing. The shock mixed with grief. I grieved the version of our relationship that had felt real, the small intimacies that had been, apparently, part of a performance. What started as desperation became method. I organized what I found into folders labeled timeline, evidence, contacts. I reached out quietly to an old client I'd worked with, someone who had left the company after a questionable billing, and showed them the anomalies. Their expression changed slowly from curiosity to anger as they read. They agreed to look further. I set up an anonymous blog to seed fragments of the story disguised as fiction, true enough to raise eyebrows, but vague enough to avoid legal traps. The blog got attention in industry circles. People began to whisper. The slow turn of interest felt like a small vindication. For the first time since the meeting, I had movement on my side. Sleeping became erratic. Dreams were haunted by folders I thought I'd lost. or by paper slipping through my fingers. Yet even exhaustion didn't blunt the clarity that had taken hold. Justice, I learned, didn't come to those who waited politely. It came to those who planned carefully and acted with patience. My plan was not about spectacle. It was about assembling a truth so detailed that it could not be waved away as sour grapes. I wanted my life back, but more than that, I wanted the record set straight. That purpose kept me going through shaky mornings and nights when I felt like the world had shrunk to the size of a lamplit desk. I started building my plan like a chess game, slow, patient, and precise. Every move had to count. There was no room for emotion, no space for mistakes. I had spent enough time being reckless with my trust. Now, every step I took would be deliberate, calculated, and cold. My first move was simple: contact. I knew who to start with. Mr. Harris, an old client who had left the company months before because of a billing issue that had never been explained properly. I still remembered the frustration in his voice when he told me he'd never work with our firm again. I had a feeling he would be willing to listen. I reached out to him using a new email address, something untraceable. I didn't mention my name at first. I simply said I had proof that could clear his doubts about what happened to his project. It took him a full day to respond, but when he finally agreed to meet, I felt a faint spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, more careful. When I slid the folder across the table, his eyes shifted quickly between the papers. There were forged contracts, emails with manipulated timestamps, and even internal memos signed in my name. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he looked up and said, "They blamed you, didn't they?" I just nodded. That was the moment things began to turn. After that meeting, I worked every night like a man possessed. I went through old drives, archived emails, even backup folders on my personal laptop that I'd almost forgotten existed. Every digital trail told a piece of the story I had missed before. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that Ethan's fraud wasn't just a one-time act. It was a pattern, carefully designed, hidden behind layers of technical confusion, fake vendors, and altered approval chains. And Lena had been there every step of the way. Her signature appeared beside his more than once. It felt like a knife twisting deeper each time I saw her name. But rage wasn't enough. Rage made people sloppy. I needed something stronger, strategy. I started organizing everything into folders, labeling them carefully, color-coding files by timeline and connection. I mapped out every transfer, every forged approval, and every fake vendor. By the end of the second week, I had a clear structure, proof that Ethan had used my identity to funnel money through shell accounts, all while Lena approved the payments as verified. But gathering evidence wasn't enough. I needed to make it public in a way they couldn't trace back to me. That's when the idea came, an anonymous blog. I called it The Truth Speaks. It would look like a creative writing project, a place where someone wrote short stories about betrayal, lies, and corruption in a corporate world. But behind those stories, every word would be true. I disguised real names with initials, replaced the company name with a generic one, and posted each entry as fiction. The first post told of a loyal employee framed by his superior. The second described a romance turned into manipulation. And by the third, anyone in the industry who had known us could tell who it was about. The blog gained traction faster than I expected. People inside the company started whispering. Someone shared it in a workgroup chat. I could almost imagine Ethan reading it, trying to dismiss it as coincidence while feeling his stomach twist in recognition. I was careful not to rush. Each week I posted a new story, just enough to feed the rumors, never enough to expose everything. I wanted fear to build slowly, to eat away at their confidence. Meanwhile, I kept digging. I contacted a few other clients who had quietly left the company without explanation. Some ignored me, others responded cautiously, hinting that they had experienced similar irregularities. One even sent me screenshots from an old billing conversation with Ethan. Piece by piece, the puzzle was assembling itself. I stored everything in encrypted folders and backed it up on 2 separate drives. I wasn't going to lose my proof again. When the timing felt right, I prepared the final phase of the plan, the exposure. The next post on the blog would no longer be symbolic or poetic. It would be factual, undeniable, and devastating. I wrote it like a confession, detailing every transaction, every email chain, and every digital fingerprint connecting Ethan and Lena to the fraud. I attached screenshots, cropped documents, and timestamps. To anyone outside the company, it looked like a story too specific to be fiction. To anyone inside, it was a mirror held up to their guilt. Before publishing, I read through it 3 times. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the rush of power I hadn't felt since before everything fell apart. I thought of Ethan's smug face during that meeting, the way Lena looked away when I begged her to believe me. I thought of the weeks I spent drowning in silence, treated like a criminal while the real one celebrated. And then I hit publish. The post went live at 11:47 p.m. Within an hour, the traffic on the blog spiked. People started sharing screenshots on forums and LinkedIn. The industry network buzzed with speculation. I stayed awake that night, watching it unfold in real time. Each refresh brought new comments, some denying, some guessing, most shocked. It was working. The truth was spreading, and they couldn't stop it. By morning, the whispers had grown into conversations. By the second day, it had reached Ethan's new business partners. I had achieved what I wanted. Not revenge yet, but the beginning of it. They were no longer untouchable. I could feel the cracks forming beneath them, and for the first time in months I smiled. Not the smile of satisfaction, but of certainty. The game I'd started was in motion now, and there was no going back. Within days, the blog spread through the entire industry like a wave no one could stop. People whispered in meetings. Group chats exploded with speculation, and the posts that once seemed like harmless fiction were now being dissected like evidence in a trial. Every line, every screenshot, every timestamp had weight. The files I had uploaded were too specific, too structured to be dismissed as imagination. Ethan tried to deny it all, claiming the posts were fake, that someone was trying to sabotage him. But the panic in his tone betrayed him. Clients started questioning everything, pulling their contracts, freezing projects, and demanding explanations. The board couldn't ignore it anymore. They called for an immediate audit, and within hours, the once confident company began to tremble under the weight of its own secrets. I watched from afar, quiet and detached, the way someone watches a movie they already know the ending to. Ethan's name started showing up in private chat groups, in whispered conversations between executives. His face, once confident and proud, now looked drawn and tired in every meeting photo that leaked online. He stopped attending public events. His carefully built image was cracking in real time, and I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. The truth was doing my work for me. Lena stayed silent at first, pretending she had nothing to do with any of it. But silence doesn't protect guilt for long. Her name started appearing next to Ethan's in comments and rumors, in client complaints, in emails that began surfacing through the audit. Her picture-perfect reputation was falling apart just like his, piece by piece. Then one morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. "Ryan, we need to talk, please." I stared at the screen, reading it twice, feeling the faintest flicker of the past. The countless conversations we once had about work, about life, about loyalty, but that flicker died instantly. I didn't reply. A few hours later, another message came in, this time from Lena. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." The words made me laugh bitterly. She hadn't meant for it to go this far, yet every choice she made had carried it exactly here. Every lie, every meeting, every time she turned away while Ethan framed me, those were choices. And now, they had reached their destination. The audit tore through the company like a storm. Every file, every document I had exposed lined up perfectly with what the investigators found. The board couldn't hide it anymore. Ethan was called in for questioning, but by then, everyone already knew what the outcome would be. Within days, he was removed from his position, escorted out quietly under the guise of internal restructuring. The truth was, he was finished. Legal notices followed soon after, accusations of fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. His reputation was ruined. His contacts disappeared. The industry he had ruled for years turned its back on him overnight. Lena didn't escape either. Her role became clearer as the audit expanded. Those same invoices she had signed, the same authorizations she had approved, they were all there, plain as day. She was forced to resign before the board could make the decision for her. Her social media went silent, her presence erased. The same people who once admired her ambition now avoided even mentioning her name. Watching it all unfold, I didn't feel triumph. No rush of victory, no thrill, just silence. Calm, complete silence. It wasn't the sound of winning. It was the sound of everything finally settling into place. That night, I stood by the same window where all of it began. The same one I used to stare out of when I thought my life was over. The city looked different now. The lights still flickered. The streets still moved. But I felt no bitterness this time, only a strange quiet peace. I whispered to myself, Now we're even. The words didn't taste of anger anymore. They tasted of closure. But as the days went by, I started to understand something deeper. Revenge doesn't heal anything. It doesn't erase the loneliness or rebuild the trust that was broken. It doesn't fill the emptiness. It just clears the smoke so you can finally see what's left behind. And what was left behind, in my case, was silence. No chaos, no shouting, no tears. Just space. Space to decide what came next. I stopped checking the blog. I stopped following their downfall. The world already knew the truth, and that was enough. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams. I woke up without anger, and in that stillness, I realized the real victory wasn't in destroying them. It was in finally being free from the need to. I had reclaimed my name, my peace, my sense of control. What came next would define me, not the pain, not the betrayal, not even the revenge. As I looked out of the window one last time, the morning light broke through the clouds. For the first time in a long while, it felt warm. I knew then that I didn't need to look back anymore. The chapter was over. The story I had written in anger was done. And what came after, that was mine to write. Not as a man broken by betrayal, but as someone finally ready to live again. Months passed like quiet echoes fading into memory. The storm that once swallowed my life had finally calmed, leaving behind silence, not empty, but peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without the weight of resentment pressing against my chest. The city felt different now. The same streets that once reminded me of my failures began to feel like open roads again, leading somewhere new instead of circling back to pain. I started over with almost nothing, just a laptop, a few saved contacts, and a stubborn will to prove that I could build something real on my own terms. Freelancing wasn't easy, but it was honest. No office politics, no backstabbing, no false smiles. Just me, my skills, and the clients who trusted me. Every project felt like a small victory. Every payment a reminder that I didn't need a company name to define my worth. At first, the days were quiet. Too quiet. I wasn't used to the stillness. There were no meetings, no arguments, no chaos, just work and reflection. But that silence became comforting. It gave me space to think, to understand everything that had happened without drowning in it. I realized that losing everything had forced me to face myself, stripped of status, ego, and illusions. I saw who I really was, and though the truth hurt, it was liberating. Occasionally, the past would tap on my shoulder. A random message from an old coworker, a news article about the company's collapse, a memory triggered by a familiar smell or song. But instead of bitterness, I felt distance, like I was watching someone else's story, not mine. The man who once crumbled under betrayal was gone. In his place stood someone who understood the cost of blind trust and the power of letting go. One evening, as I sat by my window with a cup of coffee, I thought about Ethan and Lena. I didn't know where they were anymore, and I didn't care to find out. There was a time when I imagined their downfall would bring me satisfaction, but it hadn't. When everything came crashing down for them, I expected to feel triumphant. But what I felt was nothing, no joy, no closure, just silence. Because revenge, as sweet as it seems, doesn't feed your soul. It empties it. It burns everything. And once the fire's out, all you're left with is ash. Forgiveness didn't come easily. It took months of wrestling with my pride. People often asked, "Did you ever forgive them?" My answer was always the same. Yes, but not for them. For me. They didn't deserve forgiveness. They deserved consequences. And they got them. But I forgave them because hatred was a poison I refused to keep drinking. Every time I let go of a little anger, I felt lighter, freer. I began mentoring young freelancers who were just starting out. People trying to find their footing in a world full of deceit and shortcuts. I taught them to value integrity over quick success, to protect their work and their hearts. They listened, unaware that every warning I gave came from a scar I carried. Watching them succeed honestly gave me a sense of fulfillment I'd never felt before. That became my redemption. Not revenge, not exposure, but rebuilding something good from something ugly. There were nights I still lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying old scenes. But now, instead of bitterness, I felt gratitude. If Ethan and Lena hadn't betrayed me, I might still be in that toxic cycle. Blind, naive, and desperate for validation. They broke me, yes, but in doing so, they forced me to rebuild stronger. Pain was the price of clarity, and I had finally paid it in full. Sometimes, I wonder if they ever think about what they did. If guilt ever keeps them up at night, the way their betrayal once haunted me. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It doesn't matter. Their choices belong to them, just like mine belong to me. I stopped waiting for an apology long ago. Some people never say sorry because they can't face what they've done. That's their punishment, living with themselves. As seasons changed, so did I. I started traveling, meeting new clients, writing small stories about honesty, redemption, and survival. None of them knew they were pieces of my truth disguised as fiction. Each story I wrote was like shedding another layer of the past. I realized that writing wasn't just something I did, it was how I healed. My words became my therapy, my way of turning scars into stories worth sharing. Betrayal, I learned, isn't just about losing people. It's about finding yourself in the wreckage. When someone betrays you, they take away your comfort, your certainty, sometimes even your dignity. But they can't take your strength unless you give it to them. And once you reclaim it, no one can break you the same way again. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as proof that pain doesn't define you. Your response does. There's a strange beauty in starting over. You notice things you used to ignore, the quiet joy in simple work, the warmth of people who treat you right, the calm that comes from knowing you've survived worse. I no longer chase justice, I live it. Every honest deal I make, every satisfied client, every night I sleep peacefully. That's my justice. The truth always finds its way back. Maybe not when you want it to, maybe not how you expect it to, but it comes, quietly, powerfully, and inevitably. Ethan and Lena's lies crumbled under their own weight, and I didn't have to lift a finger. The universe has a way of balancing things, of returning what's owed in due time. And when it does, it's not loud or dramatic. It's simple. It's final. Now, when I think about everything, the betrayal, the revenge, the exposure, I see it all as chapters in a story that shaped me. I no longer hate them. I thank them, because if they hadn't broken me, I never would have found who I truly am. I don't believe in karma as punishment anymore. I believe in transformation. Every pain carries a lesson, every ending a beginning. If you've ever been betrayed, don't rush to destroy the ones who hurt you. Let time do its work. Let the truth reveal itself. Focus on your own rebuilding, because the greatest revenge isn't in ruining them. It's in proving they couldn't ruin you. One day, you'll wake up, look around, and realize you've healed without even noticing. That's when you'll understand. Justice doesn't come from payback. It comes from peace. I'm living proof of that. The man who once stood in ashes now walks in light. Not because life got easier, but because I learned to let go. And when I did, the world opened up again, softer, brighter, and infinitely kinder. Because justice, in its truest form, doesn't scream or strike back. It waits, and when it returns, it does so quietly, like dawn after a long, dark night.